Hello, welcome back to Questions That Matter, where we talk about all of the interesting, exciting, and implementable work that we're doing here at TrustBridge. We recently released a paper which describes the work that we've done analyzing SEBI's enforcement actions on insider trading over the last 15 years. We used a number of different methods to do the data extraction and analysis, including using LLMs and other emerging technologies. And we've got other videos describing this, which we'll link in the description below. So we'd encourage you to go and watch those as well. We've also looked at what happened to these orders when they were challenged in appeal at the Securities Appellate Tribunal. And this has been the combined work of many people at TrustBridge. Two of us, Dr. Sane and I, are both authors on the paper, as are Sonam Patel, Natasha Aggarwal, and Amol Kulkarni. With that, Renuka, congratulations on the release of the paper.
Congratulations to you too, Bhavin.
It's
finally done.
It's done.
Yeah.
Now,
Yeah.
with that said, with the baby firmly pushed out of the comforts of home, now let's tell the world what the paper is about. Can you describe it for us?
Right. So, this paper evaluates how SEBI performs on its quasi-judicial function. We picked the question of insider trading for two reasons. One is because insider trading cases we know are becoming more and more important. You keep hearing about how SEBI is very concerned about insider trading. And so it begs the question, what is it really doing when it enforces against insider trading? And the second reason is that it's narrower, it's cleaner to define because the law itself is clear on what insider trading is, who an insider is, and questions like that help us evaluate the adjudicatory function of SEBI. So what we do in this paper is we look at SEBI's framework on insider trading. We ask questions on whether SEBI follows its own rule of law when enforcing against or when adjudicating against insider trading. Now, what does that mean, right? It means that there are principles of natural justice and there are ways in which the SEBI Act itself constrains SEBI on how it can do this function. The question is, does SEBI do it?
Right.
And of course, what this does is also tells us, gives us a time series of what is happening on enforcement. For example, if you were to just look at annual reports, you get some aggregate statistics, but exactly how many cases on what issues, what kind of insiders, what kind of penalties, the detailed work that you can get or the detailed insight that you can get by looking at orders more carefully is something that this paper is able to put together.
Interesting. So I think it's useful to keep some of those points in mind, which is one that this is one area of the securities market law which is a little easier to identify. It's more sharply defined, and so there are some elements we can pull out from there, and then there are some general principles such as the requirement of following natural justice and so on. And so the framework of the law is clear, but how did we come up with a method of identifying whether or not SEBI follows this? I think it's a little easy to say, but I think you and I reading the same order might come up with different interpretations of what's written there. So what's the framework? How did we conceptualize this? And give us some examples of what actually goes into it.
So, Bhavin, I have you and the others to thank for it. What we did, and again, I remember this from the many discussions we've had when designing that framework, is that there are some principles of natural justice that must be followed. So, for example, a show cause notice must be given. There must be some information about when the show cause notice was given. Preferably, some precedent must be cited because, none of these things are new. And the question is, the first place to look, the simplest place to look, and that is why the first place to look is to say, when you read an order, is this information present in the order? And I think those were our procedural rule of law metrics, right? You read an order and you say basic facts, check, available, dates, available, precedents, available, not available, whatever, right? So that's sort of one leg of this. The other leg of this is to say, okay, what does the SEBI Act say? And therefore, what do we expect to find in the order if it is a complete order? And what are those? Now, if I'm accusing you of insider trading, then I must detail out how you are an insider, right? What is the trading or sharing of information that you may have done?
Or are you an insider at all?
Or are you an insider at all, right? What is the connection that you have on the insider question? Then what kind of insider trading have you done? Is it sharing of information? Is it actual trading of securities? Or is it just a code of conduct violation? Then the question is, fine, maybe you've done 1 out of 4, you've done 2 out of 4. What is it that you have done? How much illicit money have you made? And on the basis of that, what is the penalty that SEBI is imposing on you? Now, this is quite important because the law very clearly specifies that SEBI has to consider certain factors. They are mentioned in Section 15J of the SEBI Act when arriving at a penalty. And this ties back to our notion of fair play.
Right.
Which is that if I am imposing a penalty on you, it has to be proportionate to the crime.
Right.
And therefore, the regulator is mandated to actually come up with a number to say, look, this is what I think you have gained illegally. And therefore, I am going to impose a penalty on you of this much, right? It's proportionate to the crime. So does the order take the effort to identify if Section 15J factors, are present? How does it calculate these amounts? Is the penalty proportionate?
Right.
Are similar offenses getting similar penalties? Similar looking offenses getting similar penalties? So I think these are the broad questions or sort of benchmarks that we create. And we don't create them out of thin air. They're really based on the SEBI Parent Act and SEBI regulations, which put the constraints on SEBI as they should. And so all we are doing is to say, we read an order, is this present in the order or not?
Right.
And, as we've discussed again multiple times, it's not about evaluating the substantive decision of the regulator, right? We're just saying, is this language, is this fact present in the order or not?
Right.
So in some ways, it's a very low bar because you could write a fact there and the fact could be entirely wrong. We are not questioning you on that, right? We're just questioning whether that fact at least, the regulator has taken the trouble to at least put that fact into the order.
So I think there are two interesting things that you've pointed to. One was towards the end when you said, we've set the bar relatively low.
Yeah.
We're not second guessing the regulator's decision. We're not suggesting that we are better placed than the regulator to take these decisions. That is entirely within their realm. That is entirely their ambit. But is this information present or not is the only thing we're asking. That's one. And I think the second set of things that you alluded to is that, yes, some of this comes from the SEBI Act and the law, but a lot of it relates to concepts like fairness and consistency and predictability. You and I commit the same violation. Why should we get different sanctions? And these are core rule of law principles. So maybe one way that we could categorize these is that some of these are procedural.
Yeah.
Can you show me information which supports that a show cause notice was issued? Can you give me dates of hearings? All of these help establish that natural justice was followed. And the other could be the bucket of what you might call more substantive requirements, which have all the ingredients of the insider trading law been made out or not. So let's put these together. You've got procedural and substantive. We've got that low bar.
Yeah.
The information just has to be there. Whether it's right or not, we don't question. What did we find?
Right. I mean, the headline result is that, on certain things, SEBI does fine. More or less, it shows you the date of show cause notice. Of course, there are very few orders where that is not there. But where it does badly is on precedence when it comes to the procedural law indicators, where we found that almost 80 to 85% of the orders have no mention of a previous AO or WTM order that might be dealing with the same issue. So I think that...
Let's just sort of pause there for a moment and let that sink in.
Right.
Right. We've seen at least 15 years of decision making on insider trading, and there is more data in the past as well. And if all of this is present, why wouldn't one look at it to say, this is what was done previously, and this is why I'm going to do the same thing? Or if I'm going to differ, this is why I'm going to differ. But what you're suggesting is that that doesn't seem to be the case.
It just does not exist, right?
Okay.
We are not able to find any mention of precedence in 85% or 86% of the orders that we have read. So I think that was something that really stood out to me. The second big thing that stood out to me really was the, the sanctions bit and the rationale that SEBI is giving out when it imposes sanctions. What amount of penalty is it imposing, and what is the rationale for arriving at that penalty, or whether it's debarment or whether it's disgorgement? What are the reasons that the regulator is giving for putting those punishments out? And there again, I felt that we were a little disappointed at the numbers that we saw. So it's not as if SEBI doesn't do it at all, which means that it knows it has to be done.
Sure.
It knows how to do it as well. I mean, these are all very smart officers. They would know how to calculate many of these things. At least the gains and the loss avoided bit. There are multiple cases where they say that loss to the larger market is not quantifiable. On that, I'm sympathetic with them.
That's
Right?
understandable.
Because it's insider trading is such an offense that it's very difficult to know what the market as a whole lost.
Right.
Right. And
Right.
maybe that the fact that that even exists in 15J needs to be questioned, because does it even make sense to ask what is it that the market lost? But I think that on these questions, on the imposition of sanctions based on 15J, I felt that things were a little disappointing.
So let's move on from there, not because it isn't interesting and important, but because I think it's so interesting and important that we should do another video
Right.
just on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I want to pick up on one point here, which is we know, as you said, that there are certain parts of Section 15J which don't seem to be implementable. And so
Yeah.
maybe there are some suggestions we can come up for better design of the parent legislation.
Yeah.
What other uses might this study and this information be put to? What is it good for, and why should the regulator listen to us?
I mean, look, first, and again, maybe as we'll discuss in a video later, which is that we looked at, out of these cases, how many got appealed at SAT and what
Right.
happened at SAT. And I think the appeal rate and the disposition rate, I mean, the decision by the SAT in terms of how much SEBI is able to hold its ground is an important indicator for SEBI to evaluate how well it's doing. Of course, SEBI can turn around and say, but why do you think SAT is making reasonable decisions? And then, that can go on forever. But to the extent that we believe that a tribunal's decisions are a metric of SEBI's performance, I think this data set is very useful for SEBI to say, okay, what's actually happening through the life cycle of my case. The second, it shows you patterns about where is it that I am falling short of the rule of law benchmarks.
Right.
Now, some of these may be used in appeal, some of these may not be used in appeal. And of course, SEBI can take the position that if nobody is appealing on this particular issue, then it's not a problem. But I'm not sure that that's the way a regulator that, cares about the market and obviously cares about its integrity should think.
Right.
So I think these sort of patterns in where are the repetitive places where you're repeatedly falling short of best practices. I think they give us an insight into where is it that SEBI could potentially invest in human capital, in technology solutions that can help get the orders to a better place. And I think the third sort of big question really is that many of these things are shaped by the parent legislation.
Yeah.
And what I mean is how insider trading is defined in the first
Right.
place, right? And so, for example, we see that the number of cases where the insider is deemed to be connected as opposed to connected have been increasing in the last few years. Now, deemed to be connected is more vague, more open to,
And anybody who has a passing knowledge of Indian law
correct.
will pause and
Yes, right?
consider how scary a deeming provision is.
Exactly. And I think that those are again questions that SEBI needs to ask itself on defining the legislation in the first place. And so this kind of an exercise can shape the policy making and the regulation writing process at SEBI. And, we really hope that this data gets used constructively to make change for the better for all of us.
Right. And I think one other use that we've been able to make of this data is to think about how to improve the quality of order writing at the
That's right.
regulator. We have a separate paper on how we could improve order writing at regulators. There's a separate video on that as well. And we'd strongly encourage you to go and watch that video as well. You've made it this far. you might as well like this video. You might as well subscribe to this channel. Share this with anyone else that you think would be interested. Thank you very much for watching.